Hey everyone, my name is Stefan and I'm the owner of Stefan Baumann Photography. I want to thank you for coming to my webpage and taking a look at these videos. This is going to be the first in a series of videos about how to get better at photography, how to use your equipment, how to know what kind of equipment you can use, and just some of the basic principles behind photography and what makes an image look good. So if you're interested, I look forward to working with you. I would just ask you to sign up below by liking and subscribing and sharing this with as many friends as you can. Right now the course is free, so I really want to share out this information with as many people as I can. So to get things started, you're going to want to take a look and see what equipment you have. You know, there's that old adage, whatever camera you have with you is the best camera. That is true. You still want to know what to do with that camera once you get it, whether it be something like this lovely little GoPro right here. I love this thing. You can do a lot of neat stuff with it. Tiny, you can drop it in the water, you could swallow it. I don't recommend it. It's probably not going to taste that good. It might get stuck. Let's avoid that. But you can take some pretty cool videos with it. You zoom in real close, it gets all weird looking. The other option is having things like your cell phone. Everybody these days has a cell phone. They all have a camera on it, and a lot of those cameras, especially, like, I'm an iPhone user, but the camera that are on the new Samsungs, I'm sorry, like, the images on there, you're welcome to prove me wrong, but they blow away my iPhone. Granted, I have an older one, but yeah, I've taken camera pictures with my real camera, and then held the iPhone up to it, held a Samsung next to it, taken a picture on all three, and it's depressing. they're getting really good. But, you know, you can have a really good camera and still take a really crappy picture. You know, it's a matter of using your equipment to the best of your ability, knowing what to do with it, how to utilize those controls, and get to the point where those controls become so natural that you don't even have to think about it. Or if you do have to think about it, it comes really quick, because if you're at a wedding or a birthday party or your kid's running across the lawn, has a big beautiful smile on their face, you want to capture that. You don't want to miss it. So every camera functions in similar ways. So basically you want to be able to use your equipment effectively. Every camera has three main components. You're going to have your shutter speed, your ISO, your aperture, and you're going to have little knobs and dials on your camera. Some of them look really fancy like this, and, you know, to be honest, this is taking a little getting used to. I'm used to having one that's a bit more streamlined. This is a Fuji X-T1. I love this camera. The one I'm filming you on is actually a Canon 6D Mark II. That thing is my workhorse. I put that thing through the ringer for video, photography, doing weddings, portraits, events, outdoor stuff, in the woods, inside, everywhere. By the time I'm done with the camera, it's usually taken a pretty good beating. I don't recommend you do that because they're kind of expensive, but, you know, it's what I do. I'm a photographer. The whole point of the camera is to be able to get everything that it looks at to what it calls 18% gray. I don't know why they don't just call it 50%. 18% just seems kind of dumb. Doesn't make sense to me, but it's 18% gray. And what that means is your camera is constantly trying to balance everything from light to dark. It wants to take everything that is super bright and make it a little bit darker, and everything that's super dark and make it a little bit brighter, so that it's in that nice, even Steven zone, right in the middle. Now, for the camera, that's what it's designed to do. You have to be able to know how to override that tendency, because it's not always correct. Like when you're looking outside at the snow, you're gonna have an effect that you may not like. So for example, I'm sitting here in front of a window. We're in the middle of a blizzard right now. It's not the nicest weather, but with the settings we're currently at, this is what happens when you turn your camera directly at it. Boom. It takes a while for it to adjust, but even there, you're looking at it, it doesn't look that good. For one, it's out of focus, so let's get that fixed. But everything looks kind of gray and blah. So what you can do is, if you make it a little bit brighter, it starts looking more like snow. But if you make it a little bit darker, to where the camera actually wants it to be, it looks like crap. So that's basically the idea behind white balance, behind exposure, and how your camera sees the world around you. Alright, so there's three main components to how your camera works. You're going to have the aperture, the shutter speed, and the ISO. The job of all three of those things is to basically control how much light gets into your camera and imprints itself onto the sensor or the film or whatever medium it is you're using. Basically, photography just means writing with light. So you're using light to write an image onto a surface, whether it be a sensor or something else. So the first of these three components is shutter speed. That is how fast the shutter opens. So it's basically, it used to be some of them were like rolling shutters side to side. Now there's some that are digital with a single lens reflex camera, for example, where the light actually goes through the lens and bounces off a mirror up into your eye. There's a mirror that hangs down, and when you click the shutter, it lifts up so the light can just go right back onto the film instead of onto the mirror. That's actually the kind of camera that I'm filming you on right now. Then there's mirrorless cameras like this one, which allow you to just take the picture and it goes digitally from the lens to the sensor, and from there there's a little TV where the eye hole is rather than actually looking at a reflected image. Both of them are very accurate. I like both of them. I prefer sometimes having this because it weighs about half as much and I can carry it around my neck without getting a headache as quickly. So when you're carrying a lot of gear, you know, you got to take that into account. So basically you have your shutter speed also. Now your shutter speed is, like I said, it's how fast the shutter stays open. So it allows you to, if it's going slow, it's gonna stay open longer and it's gonna let more light in. So that's, you know, that's like 1 second, half a second, a quarter of a second, a 30th of a second. Those are all pretty slow. Anything below 1/60th of a second, if you're holding it in your hand, it's probably gonna be kind of blurry. Just because your hands naturally, they shake a little bit. So if the shutter's open for that, it's basically like, it's recording as you're smearing light across the top of the surface. So anything faster than that, you know, the motion is gonna freeze even more. So you could have something where, you know, I move it like this and it looks kind of like a blur, whereas at a faster shutter speed, it's gonna be like, and to get individual shots of the hand freezing as it is. Like waterfalls, for example, is a great example, or star trails. You'll see a picture of a waterfall where everything is perfectly crisp detail. That's a really fast shutter speed. Then you'll see other pictures of waterfalls where it's just like this creamy white, you know, smoothness, just bounces and flows over the rocks. That's a really slow shutter speed. That's probably several seconds actually that the shutter's open and sitting on a tripod, so nothing's actually moving except for the water, and so it's blurring out. And the reason it has to be open for so long though, like that, is because quite often, you know, you're in a dark environment. Stars, for example, you don't see them moving across the night sky, but they are. They're going in a perfect arc around. Like, that's how we navigate. That's how the world turns. So stars go across the sky as it turns. Just like the sun going from east to west, same thing with the stars and the moon. But if you have that shutter open and your camera is sitting on a tripod with the shutter open for a long period of time, you get to actually track that trail of the stars, just like the waterfall coming down the rocks. Same thing with sports. If you want to capture something with sports, or a kid running, or, you know, somebody walking fast, or if you're walking and you're getting a picture of something else that's moving too, you want to have a faster shutter speed, probably over like at least 1/200th of a second, so that you can freeze that motion without it blurring up and getting enough detail. Downside is you're cutting down the amount of light that comes into the camera, so you have two other ways to deal with that. So if you make an adjustment, I hate math. I thought I would never ever use any kind of algebraic equation in my life, and then I became a photographer, which you don't actually have to think about it, but that's what it is. It's an algebraic equation. You're having A plus B equals C, or A minus B, or, you know, whatever combination it is. If you make an adjustment to one, you have to make an adjustment to one or both of the other components, the aperture and the shutter speed. Sorry, knocked my camera off balance here a little bit. So what that means is that you have the other two options available to you, and as I said, that's your aperture or your ISO. So your aperture is how big the hole in your lens is. So it's basically like the iris of your eye. In addition to limiting how much light gets into the camera, it also has a function on focusing as well. To go with the light part of it though, if you think about it, when you go into a dark room, your pupils dilate, so if somebody turns on the light, you're like, ah! Your camera does the same thing, and it says bright white. You can't see anything. Or if you're going from outside where your eyes are really, really small, you go into a dark room, again, you can't see anything because you have to wait for your eyes to adjust and kind of catch up to that. Your camera does the same thing. It's like really small, so you go into a normally lit room like this one, well, it's normally lit by the window. The rest of the room is actually kind of dark. What that allows you to do is you're actually limiting the amount of light that comes in, so you can control that, and that's indicated instead of fractions of 1/100th like the shutter speed, you have it in a number like 2.8 or 4.0. It's always a decimal point, and it's either half as much or twice as much as the one before. So you have 2.84, 5.6, 8, and then from 8 you get 11, 16, and it's not necessarily based on the number value, but it's based on the amount of light that comes in. So the higher the number on that, the less light comes in. So f22, you know, that's like being outside in the bright sunlight. You know, everything is kind of really tiny, so you can actually take a picture in bright sunlight, but you know, you're cutting out a lot of light. Same thing goes the opposite direction if you have f2.8. A lot of cameras, they don't go much open more than that. Really expensive lenses, you can get like 1.4, 1.8, 1.2, and then you're looking at thousands of dollars. So unless you've got money to burn, I don't. You can get a pretty decent one, like for the Canon, the 1.8 50 millimeter, which is what I'm shooting this on. That one you can probably get for about $100. It's actually one of the cheaper lenses that actually has that nice effect. They call it bokeh. I don't know how they came up with the word, but basically what it means is that creamy, blurry thing. So like if you see a portrait of someone, that blurriness behind them, or in this case, if I hold this up, you have this nice blurry hand and camera in the front, and my face is in focus. Well, if this was in focus, my face would be a blur. That's because my camera's set at 1.8 right now, so it's basically wide open. It allows in a lot of light. So to compensate for that, I have to decrease that shutter speed. Now, if both of those are basically at the level you want, so you have it at the aperture you want, but you don't want blur, so you don't want to go below a 60th of a second or whatever it is, you have one option left open to you, and that is your ISO. ISO used to be called ASA. It was American Standard Association. Now it's International Standards Organization, I think is what it stands for. Basically, that's listed as a group of numbers, starting at 100 being the lowest, and most of the cameras, a lot of them now will go up to about 6400. You really want to kind of avoid going that high, and I'll tell you why in a minute. But basically, the lower the number, the more, the less light is going to hit the sensor. So basically, it takes longer. The lower the number, the longer amount of time it takes for that light to imprint. So without even touching the other two, if I'm at 100 ISO, it's going to take a long time for that light to print. It's like, you know, the old photos where you had to hold them under a light to develop the image. The longer you held it, the brighter it got. That's the same concept. Now, if you start going up to 400, it's pretty a general one. If you start going up to like 1,000 or anything like that, that's when it's, you know, the room is getting a little bit darker. There's not much light, and so you're increasing the sensitivity with the size of the number. So, you know, 3200 ISO, you're probably going to be able to take some pretty, you know, decently lit shots without a flash or any extra light in the room, unless it's like pitch black. After that, you have to start looking at flashes and things like that, and we'll get into that on another episode. But the problem you're going to have with that, though, is the higher that number is, the more your camera is actually it's basically looking at a field of data, and it's saying that it doesn't have all of the information. There's like holes missing in each part of the frame, and so your camera decides, well, based on that, this and this and this are all kind of similar, so we'll fill in that hole with something similar. So you get something called noise. It used to be called film grain, and you know, on film at least, it looked kind of nice. It had a nice texture to it. In digital, it kind of looks like when your computer screen freezes or your phone screen goes wacko and you're banging it on the table and going, why did I spend all this money? That's what's happening. It looks like that. It looks like crap. You want to avoid it. There are programs where you can minimize the amount of that happens, but if you don't have to deal with it, why deal with it? It just doesn't make sense. So those are the three things. So that should be the last one you set. Or if you know you're in a certain area, you're gonna wanna set that ISO kind of where you think it is and adjust your shutter speed and your aperture accordingly. They all kind of play off of each other, and it takes practice. So, you know, if you go in and go on auto mode with your camera just automatically decides this is what it is. You need to be able to go in and do it, practice it, try it again, mess it up, make horrible photos, make wonderful photos, just keep practicing. So what I want you to do is, if you have a camera that has manual mode on it, I want you to, you know, come back next week, you know, maybe email me or post in the comment section below some photos where you take pictures using different settings. So what you can do is, for example, put your aperture at 400, your ISO at 400, put your aperture at, let's say, 5.6, and then just play with the shutter speed and take pictures of everything from a car to a person walking to a piece of grass blowing in the wind, and change that shutter speed and see what the effect is. You'll get a real good idea of how that looks. And if you have any questions, you know, just hit me up. So in the meantime, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I would really like to see you back next week. Okay, thanks.